The two biggest chip makers on Earth are heading into a war, and it's happening at the absolute edge of physics. TSMC just unveiled their 14 angstrom and 12 angstrom microchip technology. And to the outside world, this looks like incredible progress. But as a chip design engineer, I can tell you, the math is actually terrifying. For decades, every new transistor generation delivered massive gains, like 30 to 50%. And now TSMC is fighting for just 6% improvement. That's what's left of Moore's law, while AI demand requires 100 times more compute. And to survive this, the two titans are taking completely opposite paths. And one of them is going to lose. For 50 years, the rule was simple: make the transistor smaller and everything gets twice faster. You didn't need a strategy, physics did the work. That's what enabled everything. We went from room-sized mainframes to laptops to AI. And now we are back to computers that fill entire buildings. We call them data centers. But now that scaling rule is breaking. As we push silicon to the limit, the engine behind all of this is starting to fail. Because at this scale of single-digit nanometers, electrons stop behaving. They tunnel through barriers they were never supposed to cross. And once that happens, you can't scale that reliably anymore. And TSMC just made that crack visible. We've just entered the 2 nanometers era, but TSMC and Intel are already moving beyond it. TSMC just introduced A14, A13 and A12 process nodes, where A stands for angstrom, which is 1/10 of a nanometer. That sounds like a breakthrough, but even at that scale, you get about 6% more transistors in the same area. Just 6% at the exact same moment when AI demand explodes. And that gap is the problem. So the industry had to reinvent the transistor. The last time it happened was a decade ago with FinFETs, and now it's happening again, and this time it's gate-all-around. If you look at today's transistor, FinFET, the gate controls the channel from 3 sides. That used to be enough. Now it isn't. That's where control breaks. So the structure had to change. Instead of one fin, you split the channel into nanosheets and wrap the gate around all of them. Now the electric field surrounds the channel completely. Current flows when it should and stops when it shouldn't. Same principle, but much tighter control. This buys time, but it doesn't bring back progress. And that leaves us with just one question. If you can't shrink the transistor, then what do you do? This is where the two biggest chip makers on Earth split completely. One answer is radical. You stop building microchips and start building mega chips. This is TSMC's approach. You don't scale by making one chip much smaller anymore. You scale by building something much bigger. But there is a hard limit most people don't realize. Inside an EUV machine, light projects a pattern onto silicon. But it can't print an infinite area. It can only expose one fixed rectangle at a time. Think of it like a stencil, about 26 by 33 millimeters in size. That's your maximum chip size. That limit is called the reticle. So TSMC is changing the strategy. They are not trying to print one giant chip anymore. They are taking many chips, compute dies, memory, interconnect layers, and stitching them together inside one massive mega chip. Now TSMC is moving towards systems the size of 14 reticles, and eventually much larger, toward 40 reticle mega chips. And this is where the problem changes. When you have such a large chip, the bottleneck is no longer just computation, it's communication. Because if you put all these chips next to each other, they need to talk constantly. The GPU needs memory, memory needs logic. Data has to move across the package at insane bandwidth without melting the whole system alive. And with traditional copper wiring, it's getting way too complicated because it consumes too much power and generates too much heat. And this is where advanced packaging takes over. Because if shrinking transistor gives you just 6%, but rebuilding the system gives you orders of magnitude more, the choice is obvious. And that leads to the most revealing decisions in TSMC's strategy. They are saying no to high-NA EUV machines, at least for now. And that is unusual, because this is exactly the kind of machine you would expect them to adopt first. High-NA EUV is ASML's next-generation lithography machine. It costs roughly $400 million per tool, and it gives you higher resolution and smaller features. This is the future of chip manufacturing, and TSMC is saying no to it. Not now. And it sounds crazy, like they are leaving the performance on the table. But it actually sharpens their entire strategy. The strategy of being the reliable partner that delivers at scale. Because chip making is not about what works once, it's about what works millions of times, the same way. At scale, high-NA pushes resolution forward, but it slows throughput. It adds risk, and it makes every wafer more expensive. So TSMC looked at this and makes a very clean call. This doesn't worth the risk. Not now. And instead, they decide to push the existing EUV further. Using multi-patterning, you split one very tiny pattern into a few simpler ones. Print the first half of the pattern, etch it, expose the second half, then etch it again, and you get a feature smaller than a single step could ever achieve, just at the cost of more time and complexity, but it's a controlled process. And that's the point. TSMC is not pushing the most aggressive technology innovations, but they're optimizing and focusing on what they can actually ship. Focusing on yield, cost, and scale. They push the tool to its limit and build the system around it. That's operational excellence on rails. And that creates a sharp contrast. Because across the ocean, someone else is making the exact opposite bet. And what Intel is doing instead is far more aggressive. We will get to that in a moment. But before, have you noticed how Claude is suddenly everywhere? It is indeed the most powerful tool right now, which enabled many people to go from idea to app to launch without a single line of code. And now everyone is telling you, learn Claude. But no one shows you how. But I came across the world's first Claude-a-thon. It's a 2-day deep dive into Claude and more than 10 other AI tools. It's happening this weekend, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. EST, and I've got 1,000 free seats for you. During these 2 days, you will do deep research on Claude, learn how to build your own artifacts and dashboards, master more than 10 AI tools, build custom GPTs and agents, generate visuals and videos with AI, and at the end of it, be in a situation to automate your entire week. And if you sign up right now, as a bonus you get for free 50 secret Claude codes, an AI prompt library, and a personalized AI toolkit builder, all for free. Plus, you will be learning from leaders at NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. What you learn in 2 days will shape the next 2 years. Spots are limited. Register right now through the link below or scan the QR code here and join the WhatsApp community before it fills up. Now we leave Taiwan and cross the Pacific. We land in Hillsboro, Oregon, just outside Portland, inside Intel's most advanced development site, D1X. This is where the strategy flips. Because here the bet is completely different. Intel is going all in on innovations. While TSMC reorganizes the system around the limits of physics, Intel is trying to push straight through them. And it starts at the foundation. Lithography. While TSMC hesitates on high-NA EUV adoption, Intel has already installed it, and it's a part of the real process development for 18A and what comes next. High-NA EUV machine allows to focus light more tightly, enabling smaller transistor features. That's the promise. But the cost is hidden in the details. These machines run slower, and everything becomes more sensitive. More steps can fail. The manufacturing recipe overall becomes harder to control. So the real question is not whether high-NA EUV works. It works, but the question is whether they can figure out the recipe to make it to work at scale, across thousands of wafers every day at a cost customer can accept. Intel is willing to find out. But light alone isn't enough, so they bring in chemistry, so-called directed self-assembly. Now you're combining physics and chemistry in one process, and for that you use materials called copolymers that can form patterns on their own. You can think of it like a Lego set that builds itself the moment you apply heat, or a chip that assembles itself once you heat it up. That helps to lower the cost of lithography at advanced nodes and allows to push transistor scaling further. That's powerful, but very hard to control. And Intel is working on the recipe to include it in its process at advanced nodes like 14A. And that's already extremely complex, but unfortunately not enough. So here they had to rebuild the transistor. Their new architecture is called ribbon FAT, and the architecture is similar to gate-all-around. Instead of one fin, you stack nanosheets and wrap the gate around all of them, and that gives you performance at very small dimensions, but it also makes it way harder to manufacture. And then, when it already feels like too much, they add another level of complexity. They flip the chip, literally. For decades, power and signal lived on the same side of the silicon. And as density increased, they started to compete for space. So Intel decided to separate them. From now on, power and signal will no longer share the same side. Signals will stay on the front, but power will come from the back. This is power via technology. It's cleaner in theory, but much harder in reality, because now suddenly you're processing both sides of the wafer with perfect alignment, and the process complexity explodes. And then they go beyond the chip, because for AI applications, the bottleneck isn't compute, it's communication. So instead of electrons, they switch to light, so-called co-packaged optics. They build optical links right next to the chip. And then they push it one step further and start moving data with light in the third dimension. Stacking these optical links vertically, building a dense fabric of optical connections through the chip. Imagine a data highway inside the chip itself. Now, if we step back, the pattern becomes clear. Intel is going all in on technology, multiple bets playing all at once. And all of them have to work together inside one manufacturing flow. That's what makes it so complex and risky. In semiconductors, the rule is simple. Don't change too many things at once, because when something breaks, it's really hard to isolate and hard to fix. And that's why it's risky. Their path is non-linear. If it works, Intel jumps ahead. If it doesn't, it will be very hard to recover. And good news, AI demand rewards the best technology, and this plays in Intel's favor. But technology is only half of the problem. The real test is execution. Can they take it from the lab to 300,000 wafers a month? That's where something like Terafab project could help, because they need not just better technology, but also faster execution. And this is what makes this story real. This is no longer a roadmap. In early 2026, the first Panther Lake chips on 18A process started shipping. So the question now is simple. Can they scale it? And this is where TSMC excels. So far, they've been unbeatable on execution. And that brings us to something even harder than physics: trust. That is a real problem. Because even if the technology works, the business risk remains. Will customers actually move away from TSMC? Intel might not have to convince them one by one. It might get pulled in through something much bigger: Terafab. A project tied to Tesla, SpaceX, and xAI. And the ambition is extreme. Not just a giant chip factory, but something that could reach the output of 25 advanced fabs. all in one fully integrated system: logic, memory, packaging, and testing. But let's be honest, building something this complex from scratch with no prior experience in advanced chip making for Tesla and SpaceX is unrealistic. It takes hundreds of billions in investment, but at the same time, there are too many unknowns, too many possible ways to fail. So instead of learning every lesson the hard way, they bring in Intel. Very strategic, pragmatic move, which benefits to both sides. Intel brings decades of experience in advanced chip manufacturing and advanced packaging. Terafab brings scale and a willingness to rethink the entire factory as one system. But a system like this doesn't just need great technology, it needs extreme execution. The kind of execution you usually only see in companies like Tesla and SpaceX, with fast decisions and relentless iteration. And if it works, it compresses years of learning into a much shorter cycle and puts Intel back in the race. At the same time, the pressure is building somewhere else. TSMC's advanced node capacity is sold out for many years in advance. And companies like Nvidia can't just rely on a single supply line forever. That opens a window. But it won't stay open for long, because at this level, customers don't buy performance. They buy certainty. And that's exactly where TSMC excels. Zoom out and you see two entirely different strategies. TSMC is trying to build a bigger city, while Intel is trying to invent a better brick. Hundreds of billions of dollars on the line, and one of them is going to lose. TSMC says the transistor is no longer the main lever, and they do amazing research on the device level, but at the same time they scale the system around it. While Intel is still pushing the limits of transistor physics, trying to squeeze more out of silicon. They have the same ambition, but built on entirely different bets. So the question is no longer who has the most advanced transistor technology, who has the smallest transistor, but who can deliver the most compute at the lowest cost at scale. That's the metric now, just like in AI workloads, who gets the lowest cost per token. Eventually, Intel might pull ahead on technology, but TSMC has execution in its DNA. And in this industry, being right is not enough. You have to be right and you have to execute flawlessly. Let me know what you think, and if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to watch my deep dive on Terafab, or this episode where I break down DSA, how chips self-assemble themselves. And I will see you there.